Hi, this is a session on fire safety training, specifically for the security team at Baerlocher. Just a basic overview of what we're going to cover in fire safety, the alarm panel itself and how it's used, fire spread and containment, and also extinguisher use. I just want to start by showing you the video from Imperial Sugar, whereby there's an explosion. The key thing from this is the secondary explosion. I'm constantly talking to staff at Baerlocher about making sure the housekeeping is maintained so that there's not significant amounts of powder left on surfaces, because that's where the secondary explosion can be devastating. So we'll watch the video first, and then I'll bring in the other aspects after that.
February 7th, 2008, a series of violent sugar dust explosions devastated the Imperial Sugar Refinery in Port Wentworth, Georgia, just outside Savannah. Explosions raced through the buildings, fueled by accumulations of combustible sugar dust and sugar that had spilled from equipment. Thick concrete floors heaved up, and brick walls were blown into stairwells and work areas, blocking many exit routes. Fires spread rapidly. 8 workers died at the scene. 6 more died later at a regional burn center. Dozens of others were injured. The plant's massive sugar packing buildings were a total loss. The accident at Imperial Sugar was the deadliest industrial dust explosion in the United States in decades. It highlights the extremely serious nature of combustible dust hazards.
There were significant accumulations of sugar dust and spilled granulated sugar on surfaces throughout this facility. Conditions were set for a catastrophic accident.
Imperial Sugar's sprawling Port Wentworth complex began operations in 1917. And grew to become one of the largest sugar refining and packaging facilities in the U.S. Granulated sugar from the refinery was stored in 3 100-foot-tall silos and then conveyed into packing buildings, where it was packaged for distribution. Granulated sugar was also converted into specialty products, such as brown sugar and powdered sugar. Sugar was transported by a complex system of bucket elevators, screw conveyors, and conveyor belts. During this process, sugar spilled onto floors throughout the work area. In places, the spilled sugar was many inches deep. This sugar also contained fine particles, which became airborne. In addition, hammer mills were used to crush the granulated sugar into powdered sugar, creating even more dust. The machines were connected to a dust collection system, but it was undersized and in disrepair. And it was not connected to the bucket elevators and conveyors. Significant amounts of sugar dust escaped into the work areas. Workers routinely used compressed air to clean packaging machines, further dispersing sugar dust throughout the buildings. Over time, large amounts of dust accumulated on elevated, hard-to-clean surfaces, such as ducts, beams, and light fixtures. These surfaces were not cleaned often enough, always keep the dust below hazardous levels. In the tunnel beneath the sugar silos, granulated sugar flowed through chutes onto a long steel conveyor belt. From time to time, clumps of sugar would become stuck in one of the chutes, blocking the flow of sugar on the belt, spilling sugar onto the floor and releasing dust into the tunnel. But the tunnel was large and ventilated, so this airborne dust did not build up to explosive concentrations. However, in 2007, the company enclosed the conveyor belt with stainless steel panels to protect the sugar from possible contamination. The enclosure was not equipped with a dust collection system. As a consequence, sugar dust would now be trapped inside this enclosure. On February 7th, 2008, clumps of sugar were found blocking one of the discharge chutes. Sugar from the adjacent silo likely spilled off the moving belt. Dust likely accumulated to an explosive concentration inside the enclosure. At about 7:15 p.m., the sugar dust contacted a nearby ignition source, likely an overheated bearing. This primary explosion blew apart the enclosure. Accumulated sugar was lofted and ignited by the advancing fireballs. The dust clouds fueled a chain reaction of secondary explosion, which stretched through the building. Concrete floors buckled, releasing tons of granulated and powdered sugar. Evacuation drills had not been conducted, and the explosions had cut the power to much of the interior lighting. In the maze of darkened and damaged stairwells and passageways, workers desperately tried to flee the growing inferno. The CSB found that correspondence dating back to the late 1950s showed that plant managers Port Wentworth were aware of the explosive nature of sugar dust and the danger of dust accumulation. As far back as 1961, a memo described a sugar dust explosion that heavily damaged the powdered sugar mill room.
Despite the awareness of the explosive nature of sugar dust, not enough was done to manage the hazard.
In 2006, the CSB issued a study of combustible dust, which called on OSHA to establish a comprehensive combustible dust standard based on the current standards of the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA. In October 2007, OSHA began implementing a new national emphasis program to increase the enforcement of existing regulations related to combustible dust.
Imperial Sugar learned of the OSHA Combustible Dust National Emphasis Program 4 months before the devastating explosion at Fort Wentworth. But management did not act effectively to control the serious dust problem in the packing buildings.
Less than 2 months before the disaster, an internal inspection showed that many tons of sugar were still regularly spilling onto the floors. This provided much of the fuel for the massive secondary explosions and fires. The CSB found that over the years, the Port Wentworth facility periodically experienced small fires fueled by spilled sugar and accumulated dust on equipment, but none resulted in a sugar dust explosion that propagated through the plant. Investigators said that decades of operating without a catastrophic explosion may have lulled managers into complacency. In its report, the CSB issued the following recommendations to the Imperial Sugar Company. Apply NFPA standards to the design and operation of the rebuilt Port Wentworth facility. Develop and implement comprehensive combustible dust control, housekeeping, and training programs. Improve emergency evacuation policies and procedures.
Companies can go a long way to control combustible dust within their own facilities by following the existing recommendations of the National Fire Protection Association. But it is also time for a comprehensive federal on combustible dust.
In April 2009, OSHA announced plans to begin rulemaking on a combustible dust standard for general industry.
Sorry, seem to have lost sound there, but you get the idea in terms of the controls, and then from OSHA and the NFPA, how they reacted after the event. And to be honest, it's the same in the UK. we rely on disasters, shall we say, major fire incidents before we react. Use Grenfell as a classic example where the building regulations are currently being changed to adapt to this. But nevertheless, in terms of Baerlocher, reiterate the fact that as much as the majority of the powders that are inside are not flammable or explosive, there are the odd occasions where they are. And if they are ionized or charged adequately and the initial eruption or explosion lifts it into the air, then you've got that chain reaction that can take place and cause devastating effects from a secondary explosion. But like I say, housekeeping is so good at Baerlocher, I've never really worried about that in too much detail, but I constantly keep saying to people, keep it tidy and clean up your mess. So within any building and with any workplace, there's a lot of existing control measures that are in place. And part of it relies on the staff and the responsibilities that people have to make sure that these control measures are adequate. I do a fire risk assessment, and then there's an action plan from the fire risk assessment that determines what needs to be done to manage those controlled risks. I want to now discuss the fire alarm and the fire procedures as such. Put a kind of a funny picture in the corner there. I found this in one place. It was above a shop when I was doing a fire risk assessment, and it led to an open window, and then outside of the window there's a 12-foot drop down to the ground level. But that was the existing, should we say, fire procedure, which is obviously not good enough. But very much around fire procedures requires people to know what to do, where to go and how to do it. And part of this session will look at the fire safety checks that are necessary, the drills, the weekly checks on sounders, and also sweeping the area to make sure that people have in fact left the building. Now, at quiet periods, when there's perhaps only 4 or 5 personnel on site, that's much easier to manage. However, people who don't have responsibilities to go and investigate or do a fire marshal role literally should listen to the alarm and obey it and follow it. However, at Baerlocher, we're using an investigative time, should we say, time to check whether there is fire or smoke that is present within the building that could then determine a larger fire, and therefore fire evacuation is necessary. So the practice is to silence the alarm, to give the time to investigate. You've got a 5-minute period before the fire authority will automatically respond. So the alarm is linked to the 999 call. However, for security purposes, I would suggest don't rely on the automatic response. As soon as you identify that there is a fire, re-engage the fire alarm so that the sounders are on and people do evacuate. And secondly, get straight on the phone and do 999 just to reinforce. And I say that because there is a thing called call challenge, which I'm going to explain as such, in terms of the fire brigade won't respond immediately unless they get confirmation from a second phone call. So the fire alarm panel, there's 2 panels, just starting with the one in reception right next to control, security control. It's a Gent Vigilon system, and there's a repeater panel in production. So I think, again, going back to the history, there was a period whereby the old beam system that used to be in the warehouse, sometimes if you had a powder lifting, should we say, a powder release in the area, and it was atmospheric. So let's say a bag dislodged some of the powder inside it, and there was a cloud of that dust bouncing around. It could well be that it would interact with the beam. So when that beam saw and it crossed the beam, the dust, then it would trigger the fire alarm. So there was aspects around that. There were getting a lot of false activations as a result of it. And this led to an investigative time and making sure that there was opportunity for staff inside the building to confirm that there was in fact a fire prior to taking action. So it is common now to silence the alarm, do the investigation, and then re-engage the alarm if it is found to be a fire. Now that does increase risk slightly, but nevertheless, it relies on the operatives and staff in the building to be able to follow that procedure, and also for those who are not involved in the activity to listen and prepare. Inside the panel, so once you open up the cover, there are basic instructions, and inside the basic instructions you can see to the right hand side there, it's how to press the right buttons to literally either the cancel the buzzer or silence the alarm or do a reset. So, and then there's function buttons F1 through to F4 that all have a purpose. So I'm going to talk you through the various bits on that as well. Now, first of all, the one in the reception itself, the person carrying out these procedures for disabling and enabling zones will be responsible for logging, reporting, and returning the system to the correct full guard mode. So putting it back into the state it was prior to disarming or disabling a particular zone. Now, most places with a complex fire alarm system have zones so that it can identify more readily and quickly where to find the detector head that's gone off. And then you can go straight to that area to investigate, confirm that there is a fire, or to say it's a false alarm for whatever reason that may be. So by having the zones, it can allow you to reduce the time spent trying to find out where, say, one of 40 or 50 detector heads could have gone off. So it helps focus the mind, and you can use the display panel to identify where the zone is. And there's information that you'll see inside this presentation that will help you to determine where the zones are. But let's say we're doing some contracted work in an area and we don't want the alarm to go off. What we can do is disengage or disable that part of our area whilst that work takes place. So the procedure is explained here as to how to do that. When the alarm sounds, first of all, this is the typical process: silence the alarm and then reset. Now, it's not literally press one and then the other. I would always suggest you leave a time period of about 30 seconds between silencing and then reset. Now, if when you press reset, the alarm re-engages, typically there's a couple of reasons. One, either the detector head is still detecting the presence of smoke, dust, or fire. So if that's the case, it needs confirmation. Therefore, if you silence the alarm and then press reset and it doesn't re-engage and goes back into alarm mode and it's still silent, then it could have been a false alarm. So that's the kind of process or thoughts behind do the silence alarm and do a reset shortly afterwards. And if by doing that, it goes back to the norm, there's a fairly good chance that it's not in fact a fire state. If the alarm resets with no further activation, then all can be assumed to be okay. However, if the alarm sounds again, the zone number will be displayed, so you'll be able to identify where the detector head that's gone off. At that point, leave it in the alarm sounding mode so that others have the opportunity to evacuate whilst you go and investigate. You need to look at the display panel, the LCD display panel. It will indicate what the area is, so you can then check it, or the zone, check where it is for fire, or indeed whether it might be a dust cloud. There is a 5-minute time period for this to be done, to investigate, and if it's not confirmed within that time and not reset, then it automatically contacts the fire service. If the fire is in place, then obviously leave the building, because we don't want anybody to be hurt. And everything that we're doing this training here is always put yourself as number one in terms of safety. Don't be a hero. Always get out, stay out, and let the fire brigade do their job. And then the focus will be on, as a fire warden, to look at a head count, making sure that everybody's outside of the building and safe, and then you can pass that information on to the fire service. If the dust cloud that needs to settle before resetting, following the steps, then you'll need to think and hope that it can be done within the 5 minutes. If not, keep the sound, then put the sounder in silence and wait for the alarm reset. So it's kind of gauging between where the problem is, how bad the problem is, whether the cloud may continue as a dust cloud and reactivate the fire alarm, and keeping watch over that before you can then do a reset of the alarm when it's all settled down. So it might require some cleaning work, but that's only if it's in the state of a cloud, dust cloud, that's causing the fire alarm activation. There's the list of zones, and the information is provided at the side of the panel, so you could look at that and then compare it to the display. And then if it says number 3 or 03, as we'll see later, then you can say, well, that's the second floor powder area. So off you can go to investigate and sweep the area, discuss and communicate with others on the radio to say where you are and what you're doing, and then keep that communication going until it's confirmed. The other person will be at the panel so that they can then do the reset if it was a cloud. But that communication is important. And I think that's also important to keep that communication, not just with security, but with personnel or staff that are on site, because quite a lot of them do have radios. And there will probably be someone outside in the fire muster point with a radio as well, so they can keep people up to date as to what is happening at that time. So nevertheless, the importance is key communication. I'm just going to quickly go through the process of how you enable or disable, should we say, the system and various zones. In order to do that, you need the list of the zones first of all. And when you put in the information in, it's got to be a 0 in front of the number. So there's 1 through to 9. So it's either 0, 1, that's the first zone, or 0, 9. So be aware of that. The majority of this goes through the functions, should we say. So where the hand is pointing there on the menu button, that's the first thing you do. So it can bring up a change in the mode of the functions. And then to the right of that, you've got F1, F2, F3, and F4, those soft pads buttons. So those are the points or the keys that we'll be focusing on quite a lot. And then when you have to put the zone in, you've got the number pad to then add as well. So the first thing to do is to press the menu. It'll then go through to a choice. Having gone and it brings up those choices, we want you to look at F1, press the F1 key for control. And then on the screen, it should display a few options, but the second one in F2 is disable. So where you see disable on the screen, just below it, so I'll put the, hopefully it show this on the cursor. So it's showing on the display screen, they're disabled. So the one below is F2. Press F2. And also when you're thinking about re-engaging or re-enabling later on, then rather than doing F2, on the left-hand side, it says enable. So at that stage, you press F1. So we're pressing F2 first of all. And then once you've got into it, you've got a choice. At this point, we need etc. as our choice, because it doesn't give us what we need in terms of information. So press F4, the soft keypad there, and it will then give us more information. The more information is zones that we're particularly interested in, rather than groups or areas. Okay, so this time, once you've got the word zone in place on the display panel, then the one just below that is F2. So press F2. Once you've pressed F2, then you need to put in, using the number keys down here, use the number keys to then put the particular zone in. So I've used the example here of 09, or the 9 on the list. So we've got the ground floor powder warehouse. So if that's the area we want to disable, we put in 09 into that area. And then once you've done that, it will then disable that. The system should then reset by pressing silence alarms and then reset alarms if that's needed. So what we're saying is, if you know that there's a dust cloud in 09, then that's what you've done, is just disabled that area, and then we're hoping that the dust cloud will not create an activation. At that point, press silence alarms, and then shortly after that, press reset alarms, and that should stop the fire alarm activation. It should then stop the automatic response in the 5-minute period to the fire brigade. So there's that aspect as well in terms of being timely with this, and quite quick in some respects. Let's say if it's up on the top floor in production, that's quite a way to get over to that area, and hence I would suggest the need for people who are working in that area to help you to get to that in a speedy response. And that's why we have a repeater panel in the production area, so it makes a more speedy response for them who are in the areas where they believe that a dust cloud perhaps has caused a false activation. So you've disabled, then you've silenced the alarm, then you've done a reset. If it stays quiet, then everything's okay. Allow the dust to then settle and the area to be cleaned up. And then through communication, you'll say, right, we're now okay to continue. And at that point, do a silence alarms again and reset, and you should be back to normal function. However, 09 is still disabled. So then you've got to go through it again and make sure that you re-enable that. So hence, do the reverse in some respects, but follow the same instructions to make sure that that zone, 09 in this case, is then reset, re-enabled, and put back to a full guard protection approach. I'm just in the repeater panel in the office in production. I thought I'd just put a video together on this one, just showing me how to do it and perhaps reinforce.
This video is taken from the production office. This is a repeater panel, but it also has more functions than the main panel, should we say. So the first thing to do is to open up the panel by turning the key and pulling it open, and then you'll see in front of you the main information panel and then your typical sheets and so the first thing to do is to press the menu, and that will give you a series of options, and it's mainly F1 and F2 are your kind of main function buttons. With the information that's provided, you can look through this. So if I want to disable the zone, I can look inside the paperwork. I need to know which zone I want to disable, and then you can follow the information provided. So, turning over the page, if I wish to disable, the first thing I would do is press F1. So I'm going to do that, press F1. You'll see it changes, and it comes up with the options of enable or disable. So the next one, as is the instruction, is to press F1 or F2. In this case, I want to disable, so I'll press F2. And you'll see then that it says disabled, but it requires further information. So this is where the etc. button comes in. The question is, what are we actually disabling? So initially, you get that sector, zone, group choice. So most cases, we're going to go for zone. Zone is F2, press F2. You then need to, using the information provided, go to the zone specific and use the number. So let's say I wanted to disable number 6, which is the first floor powder area. I would then enter in 0, 6, and from entering that to, as a case of like accepting the information, we're going to then press F2 because just above it says enter. If I was wrong, I would go to F3 and cancel, but I'm going to do that, F2. now it's going through and it's changed from zone abled to zone disabled. Once I've done that as well, it will indicate that. Now that's a good reminder as such that something on the panel has been changed. So just to go back again, I'm going to go to the main menu, and this time I'm going to enable it. If at all you make any mistakes, you can go straight back to main menu and go back to it. So first thing to do is to press menu button and then to press F1. Got the options that come up. I'm going to go for F1. And once doing F1, the options come up, enable or disable. Bear in mind, we've just disabled, so I want to re-enable. I'm going to use F1. Enabling now wants to know more information, so we've got etc. come up, press that, and then I'm going to go into the zone, F2. Now it wants more information, so I'm now going to go, remembering that I disabled 06, I'm going to enter 06 and come back to just below that F2 because it says enter. When I press enter, we will see that has gone off and zone enabled. It's confirming that it's as it should be. Then just go back to the menu. And everything's back to as was.
Okay, so even if you make a mistake as I did there, you can see how quickly and easy it is to respond and put it back to the area. But again, just to reinforce, I'm going to go through the information exactly as it's provided inside that handout that's kept at the side of, or on top of actually, in the fire alarm itself. So again, information, think about it, the alarm's activated. First thing that they do in production is silence the alarm and do a reset. If having pressed silence and reset, it doesn't clear, then they have to do more actions. So if the alarm continues to sound, they need to then confirm whether it's a fire or a cloud. If it's a fire, then leave it to run as the alarm activates, or put it back on again. And if it's not, if it's a cloud of dust, then they can silence the alarm, and rather than reset it, they can go and investigate where it is, identify which one it is, which zone, and then put the information in. So again, I've reiterated the list of the zones there. So press menu, press F1. Having done that, the options of enable or disable come up. So in this case, press F2. Once you've pressed F2, we need more information, so press etc. until zone comes up. When you've got zone in the second line there, indicate, meaning that it's in F2, then press F2 to get the zone you want. Enter the number on the number pad. I've used the example of 09. Again there, put that in, and then it requires F2 again as an enter to confirm. And then when you've done that, try the silence alarms and try the reset alarms again. And at this stage, if there's no problem because you've now disabled that zone from the cloud itself, then the alarm should stay silent. Having done that, whilst it is silent, it will automatically stop the call through to the fire service. So this is always about default mode, should we say, when a powder cloud has set off the alarm by mistake. So it's good, and it needs to be logged, and it explains when that is. The difference will be if it is in fact a fire, then the silencing of alarms is not the best route. So you need everybody to get out there, for the alarms need to be sounded. So put it back into the state whereby the alarms can be sounded. What I mean by that is if you press silence alarm and reset because the detector is still picking up smoke and fire, then it will continue to alarm. So if in doubt, press reset. Once you press reset, the alarm should activate. If it's a false alarm, press silence the alarms. Always remember, as was said before, at the end, if you've de-energized or disengaged a particular zone because of a cloud dust, then what you need to do is bring it back a short while after, a couple of minutes maybe, to make sure there's no cloud left in the area. And then when that has cleared, reset it and also re-enable the zone and put it back into the state it was. Now, the next stage, we would like our security staff to assist our engineers to do the weekly sounder tests. Now, in the video that you'll see, there's a decent explanation as to why we're doing this. But there are a couple of reasons. The manual call points, let's say there's 45 around the site. In a year, it is the law that each manual call point must be checked at least once a year to make sure that if it was activated or needed to be activated in the fact that somebody was leaving the building having seen a fire, then they can push the manual call point, and that will assist by letting everybody else know. When I say lets everybody else know, the other aspect of this is when the manual call point is pushed, it activates the alarm. We then need to know that the sounders actually work in terms of notifying people, and it can be heard in any part of the building. So it allows us to check that our fire safety controls work so that it's reliable. And when we have to use a manual call point, we know it does work. And secondly, having used the manual call point, that others can escape safely because they can hear the fire alarm. And that's the main reason why we have to do weekly checks, so that it guarantees that at least once in the year, the manual call point is checked in its functionality. So on page 10 of the operating instructions, it tells us how to do this. And I'm just going to show you a short video on that.
On the page 10 of the instruction manual, it discusses how to do the weekly test. The weekly test, the purpose is to make sure that all the alarm sounders can be heard, and at the same time to check the manual call points work effectively, so that if they are ever used, you know that one, the manual call point will do its job and set the alarm off, and then two, when the alarm has gone off, that people can hear it and take the appropriate action. In order to do the weekly test, one person needs to be near a panel. It can be the one at reception or the one in production. And then it is a case of having the special key. So that's the test key. So one person has to use the test key at the manual call point, whilst the other person is at and ready at the panel. Now, just to show on there, you've got three actions: cancel the buzzer, silence the alarms, and do the reset. So just to show you, got silence alarms there, reset. So because you've activated, and this is at the repeater panel, there isn't the cancel buzzer in alignment there. Instead, it's up here. Right, so if you need to follow the process, it's hit cancel buzzer first, silence the alarm second, and do a reset. And it gives the information in that order. However, the difference is to engage the alarm, it is done via hitting the manual call point with the test key, turning it through 90 degrees. And then when the sounders are activated, then you can allow it so that tests can be checked, that people can hear the alarm. But once that's done, stop the buzzer by pressing cancel buzzer. Then silence the alarm when we are complete and satisfied that people can hear the sounders in the various locations. That can sometimes take up to a minute. press silence alarms. Silence alarms. And then finally, to get it back to its original state and to make sure that none of the sensors have been affected by this, and to allow the panel to do a check, a safety check, you have to press the reset button. And you should read system being reset, please wait. And that will be on the main panel in the display there. Once it has done that, sometimes it can take 30 seconds or more. It's doing a full check on all the sensors and all the sounders. And if having done that, it's happy, it will go back to a ready state, waiting to activate because something else has set it off.
So when I said at the end there's something else has set it off, what I'm meaning is it's in a ready state. So it's a fire alarm waiting state, and it's waiting for something to set it off again. So a true fire or a dust cloud. Therefore, at the end, it's completed. So as I was saying in there, 2 people are needed to do that test. One at the panel and the other person at the manual call point. Now, the manual call point requires the key. The key is kept in the engineer's office, and that's how it looks, that black, strange, wonky key there. But there's a short end section with a point on it that needs to be turned through 90 degrees. And there's a variation. In the picture at the bottom there, you can see that it goes underneath. And then on the video that I'm going to shortly show you, that's also underneath. And then I'm going to walk to another location where rather than it being underneath, it's on the side, just to show you the differences in terms of how you can activate the manual call point. Now, in activating it using the key, it means you don't have to break the glass. And these are quite often called break glass and manual call points because it says break glass on it. But what it means is, in order to set off the fire alarm, for those people who've said there is a fire in this building, I'm going to warn people by setting the alarm off. In doing so, they press the glass. It's actually perspex rather than glass, but there you go. By pressing the glass, it hits the button behind. Quite often it breaks the glass. So if you did that every time you did a manual call point test, you'd be replacing these every week. So hence the key is designed to be an alternative, and it's a quick way of doing a reset once you've set it off. So you plunge it in underneath, turn it through 90 degrees, or plunge it in at the side, turn it through 90 degrees. And then having done that, at the end of the sensor, to do the reset, turn it back through 90 degrees and release the key, and it should go back to a normal state. You'll also see on the, there's a numbering system on the various, excuse me, the various manual call points as well. What I'd like to do with all security staff is for them to watch 2 other people doing it, first of all, in both places, once at the reception, once doing the manual call point, setting it off and resetting it, in order to get a full appreciation of that, rather than just putting you out there and hoping you get it right. So this is the video I said I was showing, just to assist in the use of.
So when doing the weekly testing, some of the manual call points require the key to go underneath, inside the hole there. And then others, there's a slot around the side. You go inside instead.
I'm just going to walk now to the other one just to show you the side version on the manual call point itself. So it's just around the corner. We're in production on the 2nd floor. This one on the beam has this side access point as well. So that's kind of the procedures. Hopefully it's straightforward enough. There are 9 zones in the fire panel as listed there. It helps you to identify quickly where the detector is that's causing the fire alarm to activate. Using radios throughout to communicate is very useful in this, to make sure that at least one person is going to the area to confirm that it is either a fire or a cloud dust, or vice versa. Another person needs to be always at the fire panel So one at the fire panel, one going doing the investigation, communicating both together consistently to make sure that it's an effective response in that 5 minutes, to avoid unnecessarily the fire brigade turning up. Now, whether you call it verify or not, there is a button on the fire alarm panel that allows you to investigate. So we don't tend to use that, but there is that opportunity. What I'm saying in terms of verify, rather than using the verify button, stick to what the training is inside the book and silence the alarm, do a reset. Yeah, so you can follow that, but you can see there it also says inside the book how to use the verify button if that facility is engaged and available. Okay, so that's it in terms of information around the fire panel. One, for how to silence and reset. Two, how to do those weekly checks. And three, how to do the disengage and re-engage approach on the fire use. Just want to go and talk a little bit about fire marshal roles, because people have different titles. It doesn't matter to me what title a person has. It's that, as I've just been saying, that communication that takes place between people at different levels. So, like I say, whatever name is given doesn't really matter, providing you take the right action. All I just wanted to mention was this issue of call challenging. So call challenging is a system that was put in place a few years ago because unfortunately there's too many false alarms and the fire brigade were being turned out to unnecessarily as a result of a 999 call. And if you imagine the number of false alarms whilst they're at that false alarm, there could be a real fire taking place and that could affect them in those areas. So that was agreed, and it's now nationally accepted that call challenge is a typical approach for the majority of fire and rescue service personnel. There are some areas that are exempt from it, which Baerlocher could fall under, but what it means, regardless of it being a false alarm or not, if an alarm activates, they go out. However, what it requires is not just an automated system as Baerlocher has. They will require confirmation before the fire brigade will turn out. So what it means now is, even though you have an automated system, if you confirm that it is a fire, you must also phone 999 because they require those two communications to take place, the automated response and the 999 call, and then they will turn out. So please be aware of that, because some companies have been waiting longer than anticipated because they've said, has anybody phoned 999? And they said, oh, don't have to do it, it's automated. Well, you do, because of call challenge. They won't move unless it's confirmed from the site by a phone call. So this means that prior to phoning 999, the employer or the owner of the premise should seek to confirm that there is significant signs of a fire in order to avoid unwanted and unnecessary fire brigade response. So we've got to phone them up, even though it's automated. Now, the other aspect to that is, what if they don't turn up anyway? And they might do, they might turn up. If they do turn up, well, we've not had any false alarms in the last couple of years, and it shouldn't turn into a prosecution or enforcement action because they haven't had to turn up unnecessarily. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. All I would say is use it as a drill. Make sure that everybody got out safely. Discuss and use it as an opportunity for learning, and have a chat with the fire brigade to say, is there any further information or anything we can do in the future to help them out? Because they quite often like to visit site, as they do a couple of times a year, for a familiarization. So for me, it's not a wasted visit. It can be turned into an opportunity for learning. So as part of our safety systems, we have to have a plan specific around what we do in the event of fire. So it asks all these questions, and then if we've answered them and we're comfortable with them, then we know that in an emergency situation, we'll get the response that we want. The people will do what we want them to do. There'll be adequate communication throughout, but ultimately people will be safe and not left inside the plant at risk of being overcome by smoke. So whoever you're going to call them, first responder or otherwise, their primary objective is to check that that area or zone has been cleared and then communicate and pass that information on to other people, whether it's somebody at the fire panel or whether it's people outside, hence the importance of communicating through the radios. They may be asked to assist people who are struggling to get out of the building. Okay, so sometimes there's a need to, maybe someone's hurt themselves as they're coming out, go and grab them and be an extra shoulder for them to support as they escape. They may be required to investigate and confirm that the fire or the smoke is present in the designated area, and expand that to even say, or whether it's a false alarm because of a dust cloud. I will stress though, whatever you do when you're in that particular situation, number one, look after yourself. Yeah, I'm not asking you to put yourself at risk. So if you see signs of smoke or fire at any point, that's it. You don't have to go all the way up to where the fire is. You say, I can smell the smoke, or I can see the signs of it behind that door. Enough's enough. Turn around, out, communicate, and then make sure everybody else gets out safely. Once people are out, there's the crowd control aspect, because some people get a little bit altruistic and are heroish and say, I've got to go back inside to save something or do something or pick someone up and so on. So there's the aspect of, once people are out, keep them out. And they may be involved in monitoring final exits to stop people from going back in. So in large buildings, this is quite a problem, particularly public buildings, whereby somebody just needs to stand and say, the fire alarm's gone off, we're doing an investigation, we can't let anybody back into the building at the moment. So when the alarm sounds, put on any issued distinctive clothing. Sometimes you're issued with high-vis vests that say fire warden or first responder. Sweep the area that you're responsible for. If possible, turn off equipment, close doors and windows as you pass, providing it's safe to do so and you've got that time to do it. Check all accessible rooms, all areas, including toilets, and if you have them, refuge points above ground floor. Communicate to all that need to evacuate using the designated routes, so guide them, point them in the right direction, and use radio communication to assist. Attend post-evacuation debriefing meetings. Yeah, again, going back to the learning opportunity before. So after the event, have a talk about it and say what was good, what could be improved. There are sometimes variations. So if something's different, then think about how it can be done better. So refuse points where people are left inside the building is a classic one. So they're in a safe or low risk area, and they have to be left behind while everybody else gets out. It's always an emotional one, that one, particularly when it's a disabled person, say in a wheelchair, and they just can't get out. But there is a reason for that. You don't want them to be trying to get down stairwells because the lifts are out, and whilst they're trying to get down the stairwell, other people go past, stampede on them, and then there's problems from that as well. And the other question, what if you're not in your area when the alarm sounds? It's always a concern for people who are first responders. Say, if you're not, you're not. I'm not going to ask you to go back into the building, into a burning building. We just have to look at the head count and then make a decision when we're outside the building as to whether someone perhaps has been left inside. If that is the case, letting the fire brigade know as soon as they arrive to then say, we believe that somebody's been left inside and they're probably in a particular zone or area. So typically people on discovering fire, the alarm goes off or they might raise the alarm. There are variations on that, but fight the fire only if competent to do so. So when I talk about the use of the extinguishers later, there is that question about, do you feel comfortable and confident to be able to have a go at putting the fire out? The other thing I always say is don't use more than one fire extinguisher. You've had a go. If you can't put it out after using one fire extinguisher, just get out. And always make sure that your route of exit is safe. So never allow a fire to spread between you and a door or a means of escape. Always keep that area clear. Go to the assembly point and then communicate with people. Now, this term sweeping, it literally, as it implies really, is to just check that the area is in fact clear. So you're going all around a particular zone or area that you've been given responsible to do so, if safe to do so. Yeah, so at any point you will stop your action if you believe that it's not safe or it's dangerous or you can see smoke. heading in your direction, or indeed the spread of fire. Report to your area of responsibility. So you've picked up your IVs maybe that says you're a first responder. You go to the right and somebody else, another responder, goes to the left. And then having checked those two areas and sweep the areas, you both come back, or you communicate on the radio and then you say, I'm now exiting the building. Use safe techniques to check the doors are safe to open. What I mean by that is don't just grab a handle, use the back of your hand and approach the handle itself. If it's hot, then that's enough. It's not normal for a door handle to be hot, so it can be assumed that behind that door there is a fire causing that heat, and therefore stop. If you feel that it's cooler than or is normal to handle, then sometimes it's better or safer to crouch down just in case there's a flashover as you open the door. So what I tend to do is, as I'm turning the handle, I push. If there's a bit more resistance than normal, that could be because of the pressure that's building up as the fire is taking the oxygen. So it might be negative pressure, it's drawing the door closed. If you have that, don't open the door. So there's a couple of things you have to do when we say use those safe checks when you're opening the doors. When you've opened the door, call into the room just to check. Hello, is anybody there? Can you hear me? Just see if there's a response from anything there. If they are, assist them to get out. If not, assume it's to be empty, or if you feel it's safe to do so, quick sweep of the room to check that it's empty. And then upon completion, leave the building and report to the lead fire marshal or the person at the head count area that's overseeing things. We need to practice these things. We need to be familiar with them. And there's the importance of doing at least once a year, a fire drill. Typically, I like to have twice a year, because that gives us an opportunity to have a variety of different security staff involved on different shifts, but also thinking about the variations and the quiet periods, as well as the full volume periods when a lot of activity is taking place and there's a lot of occupancy within the building. So having a plan is important so that people know what to do and where to go. And then think about where it is in terms of the building itself. So if we look at this here, where we've got this kind of big section here is the main building that's outlined by the yellow there. So that's the section we're looking at. Production's at this end. Yeah, warehouse is here. The changing facilities are there. The office environment's there, and the lab at the front. So it's quite a long building, and it's a slightly it's not a square or an oblong. It's got that twisty bit as well. So familiarity helps with knowing where things are. In our plan, we look at isolation points. So there's the gas that needs to be considered, isolating points from that. And there's an isolation valve. You may not see it too well on this drawing, but there's an isolation valve there that can be switched off. An engineer, if they're on site, will do it. If not, just ask around and communicate. Has anybody turned the gas off? And if they haven't, do it safely from the outside, because the majority of gas is just going from that point. It's not at that point, so it should be relatively safe to isolate that in the early stages of a fire. I just wanted to consider what we mean by fire spread. The four main techniques are conduction, convection, radiation, and direct burning. So what I tried to do is show a picture of it, should we say. So convection is heat rising. So you might have a ground or a basement fire, but because there's a vent shaft or a stairwell, if the door's open, there's an opportunity for the heat to rise. And that can cause a fire at the top level, the roof area, where the fire started at the ground or basement levels. Conduction is a bit like radiators, should we say. So the radiator's on one side of a wall, but the pipes go through, and it could be the fact that the fire is next to a radiator, it heats up the metal then transfers hot through to another room, even though it's segregated via a wall. And that again could cause a fire to spread in a different room via conduction. Radiation is kind of like horizontal heat, but it's the heat pumped out away from the source, not just convection going upwards. And that can mean by a local fire can then set fire to other fuels in close proximity on the similar level. And then direct burning literally is materials next to other materials next to other materials. it's just continuing fueling the fire if it has the ignition source and the oxygen to support it. There's what I'm talking about in terms of convection. A convection as a heat. So you've got the picture at the bottom there, it's in a ground floor, but because of the openings into maybe a lift shaft or a stairwell, it then transfers the heat via convection up to the top, and you can end up with more fires rather than where the original source was. This is one of the reasons now why many buildings have smoke vents fitted to the top in the roof ceiling or in stairwells, and literally it's a strong fan up at the top, and as the heat and the smoke is created, rather than it building up, it just literally escapes into atmosphere above the building itself. The main concerns about fire and the hazards are oxygen depletion, because it's using the oxygen to source the fire. The flames and the heat, so the burning from that. Smoke, it's usually the case of smoke is the killer. Gaseous combustion, so you've got, if you think of the variety of different materials and plastics and the likes of, that combustion product is quite nasty and itself is very damaging. And then finally, structural failings. So it's important that we always have a minimum of 1 hour protection in a fire escape route or a means of escape, a corridor typically, so that it offers you that amount of protection to be able to get out before the building collapses. Consequences, if you look at the hazard, what's the outcome? Burns, inhalation of smoke, toxic fumes, and death in the extreme. Other consequences are building damage, loss of business and jobs, disruption to the job itself, transport disruption, environmental damage, flora and fauna damage at and around the area as well. And sometimes the damage can be in the local water system. But let's say the building has asbestos sheeting, which this one doesn't. But I've been involved in a fire a couple of years ago that was, and the asbestos sheeting then, the particulates are then spread around along the wind, and then people in the 2 mile proximity. We have to make a note of that because they could have been their health could have been affected by those dust particulates. Burning issues, well, fire doesn't make an appointment. That's one of the key things. As much you would say, oh, it's not going to happen now. We never know. We really never know, because it can't be foreseen in some cases. Fires occur more at home than at work. That's a true statistic, particularly when it used to be chip bomb fires, which are a lot less of now, but nevertheless, we still have fires at home. And also, if you think about smoking, there's less people smoking in the workplace now because of the smoking in building regulations that stop that from happening. But people still smoke at home. So that can be an ignition source to a fuel. All big fires start as little fires. That is a fair fact, you know. So if we can put the small fire out, it becomes a big fire, and we can reduce the amount of damage and impact on the business. People do die regularly in fires. Typically, it's between 40 and 80 people a year. Most are killed by the smoke, not by the burning or the fire itself. So, part of our training, the idea is if you know what you're doing, there's more chance you can get out safely, but also you can save your own life, save other people's lives. Now, the typical approach, I've put in like 5 pictures here as to what we expect to be done. But for other people that are not involved in doing sweeps or fire responders, they would literally follow these 3 routes. So first of all, if they identify there's a fire or smoke, they will hit the manual call point, because sometimes the detectors don't pick it up quickly enough. So they will hit the manual call point and then follow the fire action call point information just above it. So wherever you have a manual call point, there's usually information to tell you where to go and what to do. So there's the opportunity to read the information and go. Don't use a lift. Passenger lifts typically are designed to drop down to the ground floor in a controlled, safe way, but stop at the base to allow anybody that might have been inside to escape out. But in doing that, it means that they're not trapped in the lift when the fire alarm activates. Then use the signage to your means of escape. Follow the signage and evacuate as you should do. If there are refuge points, then people who need to go to refuge points stay in those areas, and they have to be kept clear so that a wheelchair has enough space to be able to stay in that area. Some of them have communication points with security controls. We don't have that at Baerlocher, but that's typical. And then finally, if safe to do so, and if it's a small fire, then have a go at it using one fire extinguisher. So that's just reiterating what typically most people do, is to follow the evacuation drill and the way they've been trained, do the test on a regular basis till it gets the right habit. If it's essential, then do it and make sure that you get out as quickly and safely as possible. Just wanted to show you here what happened in, it's 1971 in Woolworths in Liverpool. On the second floor, I think it is, where the restaurant was, there was 9 people found dead close to the fire exit in the restaurant area. And then there was one person who tried to evacuate earlier that was further into the building, but was overcome by smoke. It's concluded that the majority of people that died in that were in the restaurant area, and they'd paid to have their lunch or break. And therefore, because they paid for it, they assumed it was a false alarm. And because they couldn't see the smoke at the time, they continued eating, even though the alarm was going off. It is thought as well that one of the fire exit doors was not blocked, but resistive. So when somebody tried to push it, it was hard to open. And as a result of that, they assumed that the door was locked or blocked off. And therefore, and also the other issue was lack of signage. There wasn't enough signage to indicate where to go and what to do. So there's too much confusion. There's too much time delayed because they'd paid for the meals. There was nobody patrolling or sweeping the area to tell them where to go or what to do. So they ignored it for far too long. And that results in the 10 of the people on this level being exposed to toxic smoke. So all I'm saying there is take appropriate action when you hear the alarm, do what you have to do, but always put yourself as number one in terms of safety and get out when you need to. Fire extinguishers, it's always a voluntary thing because some people react in a fire situation or a crisis and can't think straight, and because of that we can only make it voluntary. So put yourself number one first, get out if you need to. If you discover a fire, raise the alarm. At the side of most alarms there's usually a fire extinguisher, so that's why there's some logic to that, that if you feel you can have a go at it, then certainly do so, if you have a clear means of escape. So coming back to the point I said before, don't let the fire spread around you and trap you. It should only use the extinguisher really to aid you escape, unless it's a really small fire and you're a competent person with a lot of experience of firefighting. In the very early stages, and it's only a small fire, then have a go, try and put it out. But if it starts to get bigger, just leave it at that. There's different types of fire extinguishers. In my fire risk assessment, I've made it so the extinguishers in the areas are typical for what you need. So there's always the concern of electrical fires and water using water extinguishers. So we try to avoid that. So you'll see more CO2 and powder extinguishers than you do water extinguishers. So there's a variety of different types of extinguishers. The rule is that 5% of the casing of the extinguisher should be color band to identify what type of extinguisher it is. So water is red, foam is cream, powder is blue, and CO2 is black. And then there's the good old fire blanket, which some companies still use, but it was designed for chip pan fires and certain hobs, gas hob fires, but you don't need to have that. However, there's this common rule that if you're in a kitchen area, then you provide a fire blanket to smother. So how does it work? Well, you look at removing one of the elements. So if you starve it, let's go back to that. So you starve it by removing the fuel, you can smother it by removing the oxygen, and you can cool it by removing the heat or using a coolant on the heat system. So those are the three key principles around the fire triangle. In Baerlocher, we have this large fire extinguisher. So the procedure, we have a SOP on this for our staff who are going to use it. In the event of a fire, locate the nearest fire extinguisher and follow these steps. So this is the large extinguisher, which means we've got more to be able to use a really large amount, and it can last for about 2.5 minutes. So first of all, cut the tie using a knife and then pull the pin out. Check that the handle, look at the directions, open or close. Check the handle on the nozzle before use, so you know it's closed when you first uncoil the lead, and then when you then turn it, obviously when you're pointing it at the fire, you know you're in control of it. So make sure that it's closed first, but check the direction that it's in. Unravel so you've no kinks in the pipes, so it's nice and straight, and you can obviously get your position close to the fire but not too close. But the kinks you want to avoid so it doesn't affect the pressure. Turn, open up, should we say, on the nozzle. So turn the knob in an anti-clockwise direction, and that will open it up. And then also check that the gauge is in the right section. So on this particular one, we're saying that the pressure is good if it's between 10 and 17. Unfortunately, the one I took the picture on, it was one that we'd used in fire training, so we'd lost the pressure on it. So in this case, you can see how it's got 0 pressure in it, and therefore it needed to be refilled and repressurized. So make sure that when you look at it, it's in the green zone, and that's why I've tried to show what we're looking at there in that extra bit of information. Then you need to focus on where it's going to go. So point it at the fire. It's ready to use. Hold the swivel handle with one hand and the red chute with the other. So you know you've got control, a bit like a gun. To the fire extinguisher, following the marks on the handle. So open it up by turning in the right direction in line with the directions. Point it at the base of the fire to then extinguish the fire and keep it going. Like I say, you've probably got about 2.5 minutes worth, and you can put out a lot of powder from this. It's great that we put a fire out, but it does take longer, should we say, to clear the mess afterwards. However, I'd rather it was totally emptied and we clean it up to make sure that fire is completely out. On other extinguishers, you've got the usual information. You've got the icons that explain the 1, 2, 3 process, and you've also got the different icons that show what type of fuel the extinguisher is used to put that fire out. So in the ones here, we've got A for typical carbonaceous fuels, you've got B for liquids and gases, and you've got C there from a continuous fuel. There are special fuels as well as the final one being electric. Electricity is not considered to be a fire, it's more of it, or a class of fire, it's more an ignition source initially, but there is the concern about putting water on electricity. So before you attempt to tackle a fire, raise the alarm, make sure that everybody else is aware of it, ensure people are being evacuated, make sure someone has called the fire brigade. Even if you do put it out, and even if it's a small fire, they want to come, they want to log it, they want to check if there's anything that can be improved. So fire deserves our respect. Treat all alarms as real unless told otherwise, and that is important to have that communication where someone will say, it's not a fire, it's a dust cloud, or not sure, we're still investigating. So make sure the information is significant. On discovering the fire alarm, call the fire brigade, leave the building, make it safe. Know all your escape routes, because that's important. And like I was saying before, don't allow yourself to get trapped. And fire prevention is better than firefighting. So make sure everything works as it should do, rather than trying to fight the fire when it's gone wrong. If you do sweep as a first responder to check that the area is clear, then also be aware of where the fire could be. Do it safely, don't put yourself at risk. We all carry a responsibility for fire safety. So it's no one individual has a higher level than anybody else. We all need to look after ourselves, look after our areas, and make sure that the potential for fire is reduced wherever possible. That requires communication that requires acknowledging things that aren't quite right and then taking action. So it's important that we talk about it and look at issues. And like I said, the debrief that we do after any alarming investigation and activation allows us to learn from it. So it's good to do the debriefs, have a chat about it to identify what better can be done in the future. Okay, so that's the end of the session on fire safety. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you've learned something useful from that.